Good afternoon, good evening, no matter where you're calling from. My name is Pierre Mitchell. I'm a managing director at Spend Matters. And with me, as always, is Bill Michaels, VP of Operations at CIPS Americas. Bill, you want to say hi?
Hey, how are you?
I am good. I am good. Well, everyone, thanks for attending today. The topic of our discussion today, of our Spend Friends session, is how does your salary stack up against other procurement and supply managers within North America? CIPS also does have insights kind of globally on on these topics, but we're going to kind of focus on the North American view. And also, what are some of the other workplace trends that we're kind of seeing coming out of the pandemic, but just more generally in terms of our new never normal. So to talk about that today on Spend Friends, we are very privileged to have as our guest Malcolm Harrison. He is the Group CEO at CIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. So Malcolm, want to say hi?
Yeah, hi, and thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. Great to be with you.
Well, it's great to have you. So Bill, why don't you kind of kick us off here, given that you're at CIPS as well, and you can be our lead moderator on this for now. So
Sure. I'd like to introduce Malcolm. It's really my privilege to introduce Malcolm Harrison. For those of you that don't know Malcolm, he is the Chief Executive Officer of CIPS, the Chartered Institute for Procurement and Supply. For those of you that don't know CIPS, it is a professional body with 200,000 professionals in our community and over 150 companies. Malcolm has had an extensive background in purchasing with companies like Mars, InBev, Nestle, Rexam, and the Crown. So let me start with the first question. CIPS released its North American annual survey last week, and the good news is that procurement professionals on average have received a 4.6% growth in terms of pay increases, almost a full percentage point above last year in all industries. What accounts for that, Malcolm?
So look, I mean, I think what's probably accounting for more than anything else, Bill, is that this is a profession in demand at the moment. And we hear that from literally across the world. And as every procurement supply professional will tell you, when demand exceeds supply, then prices tend to go up, not down. So yeah, I mean, look, procurement professionals are really sought after at the moment, and the pandemic, I think, has really helped in terms of raising the profile of the profession and some of the fantastic things that our professionals have been involved in delivering, whether it's been sourcing masks, whether it's been sourcing vaccines, whether it's been keeping supply chains moving, keeping supermarkets moving. There's so many great stories out there at the moment.
You know, as we look at it, one interesting fact from the survey is that 71% of the respondents felt that their organizations had more respect for procurement. Procurement's improved. Have you seen the same thing globally, and how do you relate to that?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. 71% said they'd seen a positive change. And it's a question we ask every year, Bill, and that's up 10% from last year. And that's a significant move. But what I also think is important and really encouraging is we're also seeing increasingly senior audiences. So CEOs, chief operating officers, chief supply officers, all recognizing the importance that procurement specialists can bring. And that's another question we ask, and that has increased dramatically from 55% last year to 72% this year, which again suggests that the pandemic has really emphasized the strategic benefits that a strong procurement function brings, and it really has increased its visibility at a higher level.
Well, I think procurement has had to take roles on that they haven't in the past with the pandemic. Find supplies. Companies like GM and Ford had to actually go into different businesses and find all the components to build ventilators. I think the pandemic has had a really, really big effect, and I think we're still feeling the effects of that. You agree?
Yeah, no, I agree. And look, I mean, this is a fantastic profession. It always has been a fantastic profession. And people that have spent much of their careers in procurement and supply and have had great training will recognize the importance of really understanding your supply chain in depth, of having real transparency of your supply chain. But also the thing that gets procurement professionals really gets them going and really gets them excited is finding solutions to complex supply issues. And we have certainly had some complex supply issues brought on by this pandemic.
As we look at what's happened and everybody now working remotely, do you have any suggestions for managing remote procurement teams?
Yeah, look, that's a very good question, Bill. And this clearly does not apply just to people that work in procurement and supply. But one of the many things that the pandemic has brought has been a shift to remote working or more remote working. And I think what it's done is it's highlighted for procurement and employees what their different needs and requirements are. There are different models, but what we're seeing literally from across the world is a trend towards a more hybrid way of working, where people are not working exclusively in the office, are definitely spending some time at home, working from home, because we now know we can do that effectively. And depending on the tasks you're doing, actually, I would argue that working from home is sometimes more productive than it is working in the office. No distractions. Well, yes, you do. You get distracted by the dog or the children, or a cat tends to wander in, which you definitely don't get in the office. But you don't get the same distractions. You don't have the issues with the time you spend commuting. So for sure, we believe we're going to see more people working in that sort of hybrid way in the future. And it gives better work-life balance for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, we did a remote class for one of our clients, and what they said, it wasn't the money that they saved in having people stay in hotels and fly in. It was the 2 days of productivity coming to and going from the workshop.
But I also think, Bill, that as a manager or a leader, having your team working remotely brings you some new challenges, because I think you've really got to think about well-being, probably even more than you did in the past, because people are isolated. They are sometimes more on their own. You can't so readily see and feel how somebody has to see how somebody's getting on. And I think issues like inclusion and trust become so much more important, and they're absolutely key to productivity. You cannot manage people remotely the way you would if you see them every day or every hour. And getting that dialogue right, I think is incredibly important. So do I know what the answer is? No, I don't, not yet. I think we're going to see this evolution in terms of working practices. The one thing I'm absolutely sure about, though, is communication. Communication is going to be even more important than it was in the past. And the great thing is we've got these digital tools now, which can support us in doing that.
Yep. I'm gonna jump in here. I want to ask a little bit about on the diversity and inclusion side. So, certainly there's a lot of kind of employee diversity and inclusion focus, in terms of part of that overall employee well-being. But, historically, we've seen procurement promote a lot of, focus in terms of supplier diversity, but often kind of maybe narrowly around regulatory compliance, at least here in the US, and things like that if you're selling to the government. But more broadly, I mean, it seems like folks are starting to look at supplier diversity and inclusion a little bit more broadly, in terms of whether it's also from an ESG standpoint or whatever. Maybe just tell me a little bit about what you're thinking, what you're seeing, in terms of supplier diversity and inclusion from kind of a broader context, from a global scale, any kind of trends or just insights on that.
Yeah, sure, Pierre. I mean, I think, look, diversity of supplier base has always been important. And it's interesting, isn't it? Some of the organizations that have got caught out by the pandemic are the people that ended up with sole suppliers, and even worse, sole suppliers for critical items. I mean, there's one organization we know that should be nameless that said, well, it's okay, we've got two suppliers. We said, okay, where are they? Well, they were both in Wuhan. So yeah, they may have had diversity of supply, but they didn't really have the protection that you should get from a diverse supply base. And there are other really big benefits of diverse suppliers as well. Particularly bringing in small suppliers. They tend to be more agile. They tend to be more innovative, and they're more flexible. So we've always been fans of having a diverse supply base, and I do believe that the agility that has been required to work through the pandemic and the resilience that organizations are now saying they need coming through from the pandemic, both of those are things that are going to point towards a more diverse supply base.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. And I think finding the really talented suppliers and innovative suppliers and being able to bring in the smaller ones rather than just rationalizing the supply base, and it seems to be a really important topic. And also, as you said, you kicked this off with kind of looking at, labor markets and employee markets as a supply market like, no other. And definitely seems to be, as we're ramping back up, a big struggle for folks to find really talented staff that can really, execute, really have multiple skill sets. So maybe just talk a little bit. I think there's a slide on this in terms of the recruiters. 64% of the recruiters are struggling to find talented staff. Is this just kind of a short-term problem, in terms of demands are like kicked back up, or is this kind of more of a systemic issue?
I'm going to give you a very honest answer. I don't think we know yet, Pierre. And the reason I say that is I think some of the impacts of the pandemic, they haven't really all come through yet. For sure, though, just about every organization I talk to tells me that their people have had time to really reconsider what is right for them and what the right work-life balance is for them and what do they want to do, what do they not want to do. And I think, as an organization, if you're not offering that hybrid way of working, I don't think you're going to be particularly attractive to some of the most talented people that are out there today. But I know of stories, particularly where people got used to commuting long distances. And in the US, I know lots of people live in one city and work in another city. That's pretty typical in US. And those people have been back home and they've spent a lot more time at home than they probably did in the past. And some of them, that's made them reconsider. Some of them said, actually, we really like this. Maybe others have said they don't like it at all, but the people that have said they really like it are saying, well, I'm not sure I want to go back to that old lifestyle that I had before. So where you get talented people that are in that position, there are going to be more vacancies, there are going to be more opportunities. And I don't really think we've seen that play out yet. I mean, look, we're not through this pandemic. We're getting back to this new normal or never normal, as I increasingly hear people saying. But I don't think we really know quite what it's going to be yet. But just as we don't really know what this sort of new blended hybrid way of working is going to be. But what I would say, people who know me, I think I've said this for many, many years. There is always opportunities for good, talented people. And I think that the pandemic doesn't change any of that. What it does change is you've got individuals that now maybe think about different factors in terms of their choice of where they want to work and who they want to work for. Well,
it sounds like, you're going to have whatever the African parable, you're going to be running, whether you're the lion or the gazelle. And, it does sound like there's going to need to be some agility and some skills that are required independent of the specific kind of process area or capability area. And I think on the next slide, there's some insights on the study. I'd love to get your perspectives on. So you mentioned communication, and certainly communications are just one of those, it seems like so simple, but yet it's so often, challenging to actually do, as well as leadership and stakeholder management and things like this. But if we go to the next slide, we can kind of look at the top 5 skills that were kind of most in demand. And it was just an interesting mix of kind of domain specific things, obviously negotiation, right? And sourcing. But what's interesting is supplier relationship management really popped up, which in itself kind of requires not just, skills around scorecards and things like that, but how do you just manage that supplier relationship as much as they're managing you? Maybe just talk a little bit about this mix of skill sets and between kind of, generic and very purpose-built, skill sets, and how, you see that changing here, given that you've done, you've seen this for years unfolding.
So look, traditionally, negotiation and sourcing are the key skills in procurement. And I think I would argue that going out and negotiating a great deal, if you don't implement it, you never get the value for whatever it is you've negotiated. And implementing a deal, particularly in complex organizations, is all about communication and change management. And then once you've implemented it, it's all about managing that supplier relationship. And I think what we're seeing coming through is there's more people get a real appreciation of what the strategic value of procurement and sourcing is, then I think people recognize increasingly that, yes, the negotiation and the sourcing are important. However, because they now strategically understand what this function is all about and the great value that it can deliver, I think people are then saying, now we see that communication, change management, supplier relationship management, leadership are really, really important skills for people to have in procurement and supply.
Well, Malcolm, one of the things that I've been talking to people about is that this is the first time that we've really, in generations, been in a supplier market where the suppliers have the supply and they're really in control of the relationship at the moment. And if you don't have a really good supplier relationship, you're not going to be the person that's going to be getting the materials. You're going to not have the best customer relationship with your supplier. And it's not easy to go out and find a new ones when you have a critical shortage. So I think that's moving higher on the agenda, and people are definitely.
Sure. I mean, look, Bill, as a buyer, you want to be the customer of choice. And that's been again particularly true in the pandemic. I mean, you wanted to make sure that if there was limited supply, then you were preferred rather than your competitors. So yes, you're right. A shortage of supply or an excess of demand over supply, and I think it's both. By the way, I think in some areas there's been a shortage of supply, but in other areas we've just seen a huge increase in demand. I mean, there are all the things that we now need because of the pandemic that we didn't need before. That's all about increase in demand. And then you've had channel shifts as well, because as people have started living differently, working differently, eating more at home, not going out so much, you've had channel shifts to cope with as well. All of those are challenges for procurement and supply professionals. So yeah, you're right. There are lots of trends at the moment, all of which I think are well, frankly, great news for people working in the profession.
Yep, Malcolm, I want to just jump in real quick on this. And so that topic of, I'm going to pick that, number 3 topic of SRM. It seems like the whole area around supplier management, however you want to kind of define it, there seems to be a lot of tailwinds for it right now, both in terms of the need for innovation and being that customer of choice and bring that in, the risk and compliance side. And, if you're going to do supply chain risk and compliance, you got to do supplier risk. They are the gateway and part of the supply chain. So there's just a lot of, and also we have kind of more on, if you're going to manage these really strategic relationships, you have to have that kind of strategic account and strategic, partner relationship to match up with what, how the supplier is looking at you. Can you just, procurement so often on this has been very sourcing centric, and let's kind of be honest, right? In terms of category management, it's been very category sourcing focused quite often. And finally, I think we're starting to see this this transition to how do we do kind of, broader third-party management, relationship management, partner management, SRM, et cetera. Just maybe comment a little bit on some of what you're kind of seeing with clients as they're kind of moving and you talk a lot about branding and the power of the brand and et cetera. And that one of the things that procurement can impact. But the brand of procurement and really working not just on, doing deals and paying, pushing POs, but really being that relationship manager. Can you just talk a little bit about see sure. Maybe what's going on out there?
Sure, Pierre. So look, the fundamentals will always be important, and the fundamentals have always been about negotiation and sourcing. I would argue that the likes of supplier relationship management, change management, communications have always been really important as well. What I think you're seeing now as well, because nothing's gone away, you've got some more really important issues that are coming. And a lot of those are driven by issues which are really important to society. So climate change and some of the challenges around sustainability. And I was talking to an organization the other week that said, yeah, we've looked at our organization, we've looked at our manufacturing operations, we've looked at our supply chain, and And we've decided that 90% of the issues in terms of climate change are in our supply chain, not inside our own operations. So that then brings another huge pressure on that organization, which is a very big brand owner, and therefore, the brand is in the eyes of the consumer. And we've also got another factor, which is individuals are thinking about who they're going to work for. They're thinking about which brands they're going to buy. And investors are thinking about who they're going to invest in. And all of that is in part based on the ethical reputation of that organization and how that organization is being managed against ethic and sustainability goals. So it's an exciting, but it's a really complex situation. So none of what was there in the past has gone away. You've got that additional emphasis about change management, about communication, about really making sure you're managing suppliers properly through SRM. And then you've got this additional focus around issues like ethics, like integrity, like climate change, like sustainability. Look, I can't think of a much better place to work at the moment. And so it's exciting, and the profession is more in demand. So that goes back to where we started this conversation, which says, yes, we're beginning to see a bit more salary inflation.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I think it's a great point around some of the ESG concerns that are out there, whether it's just from a compliance or from a true risk standpoint or from a brand standpoint. And definitely, it seems like the most sophisticated companies are really trying to not only lead with innovation and sustainability and things like that, and not just a check the box regulatory compliance, but really using that to bring in the best talent that sees procurement. In fact, in the CPO study that we did last year, the most sophisticated companies, so many of the CPOs, they said they viewed procurement as really a way to kind of change the world through changing the supply bases, and what they can actually affect and in effect change. And that's a very powerful, kind of statement to your point, that ability to kind of affect that change at scale.
It is. And you also, I think you're seeing some, just if you talk about changing the supply base, you're also seeing some organizations saying, well, look, this is so big that we can't do it all on our own. And we actually need to collaborate, and we need to work with other organizations who are using the same supply base. Sometimes we even will work with competitors. Now, clearly, you do it on non-competitive issues, but if you're talking about climate change, I'm sorry, that's not a competitive issue. And if you want to get that consistent message into the supply base about climate change or about ethical sourcing, then sometimes a better approach is to have a cross-industry approach, such that the suppliers are, one, they're getting a consistent message from everybody, but secondly, those suppliers are able to spend time on really improving their own supply chains and not having to deal with umpteen slightly different messages from their different customers. So that's another trend. And then another issue here, and this one's probably close to your heart too, is this is all driving a need for increased transparency. And you don't get increased transparency without having the right system or the right data, and then the right systems to be able to provide the data and the information that gives you that transparency. So that's another trend that we're seeing at the moment, and we're seeing a lot of organizations investing in systems. And one of the things I think you guys at Spend Matters have always done very well is actually help people try and fathom out which are the right solutions to use in the right situations.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think it's not just the right technology tools as machine tools, but now focusing on the I in IT around the information and the intelligence and the flow of data to, better manage that supply chain, through managing that information as much as managing the flow of materials and services. So, hey, Bill, why don't we kind of bring you back in here? Comment during the conversation.
Well, yeah, well, we got a question for the audience from the mic in the audience from Malcolm, and it says participants in a networking meeting yesterday were concerned that they might not have the skills to address the pressures to meet sustainability and other CSR goals. Is CIPS trying to address these skill gaps?
So yes, we are trying to address these skill gaps, and I would say that many of the really good fundamental skills of true best practice procurement, which is all about understanding your supply chains. It's all about understanding where the risks are in your supply chains. It's all about understanding what impact your suppliers are having on the environment, on climate change. So if you've got all of those skills and you're recording all of that data, then that puts you in a much better place to be able then to address the issues. And Bill, you know, that's at the heart of the training that we deliver.
Right. It certainly is. And you know, I think it's really important that you understand all those suppliers in the supply chain, what do they make up? And, you know, a lot of companies just focus on first tier, where really they have to now expand and understand what's in that supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, take no answer. You know, most of us will either drink beer or carbonated soft drinks. Yeah, and probably most of us have consumed beverages out of a can in some stage in our lives. Yeah, cans, most of them are made from aluminum. But the real issues in aluminum are around recycling, and they're around the energy that is used in terms of converting bauxite through to aluminum. So good procurement people will understand that supply chain really, really well. And by understanding that really well, you're able to work with your aluminum suppliers, not just your can suppliers, but your aluminum suppliers, to make sure that those aluminum suppliers are absolutely thinking about where are they getting their energy from? Is that energy coming from natural sources? What are they doing in terms of heat recovery in their operations? What are they doing in terms of how do they de-ink old cans? I mean, look, those are all the skills that good procurement and supply people would have.
So we have some more questions here, and I just want to encourage everyone to send any more questions in. But just another practical, pragmatic issue is what's going on with commodity prices. The producer price index for the last year just came out at up 7.5%. Obviously, in commodities, like metals, like you're mentioning, definitely feeling it. Our company, Metal Miner, they cover metals. It's definitely, it's a tough situation. And so we have this question that came in, which is, what additional headwinds are anticipated in 2021 that you're saying with inflation, coupled with some of the commodities that are still in short supply and the changes in consumer demand? Is this going to cause another shift in demands for procurement and the skills? I don't know if it's around commodity management, but just more generally, maybe talking about that as we have much more of a supplier's market, to Bill's point.
Look, I think yeah, commodity price management is a specific skill in its own right, Pierre. And how do you hedge when you can hedge, such that you can then mitigate that risk? But not everything is hedgeable. Not everything has a terminal futures market that you can use to manage that risk. But where it does, then you would say, yes, that is a skill that you would expect good procurement people to either have or to have access to, if that's the risk that you're trying to manage. And I would, I've seen some organizations over the years kind of say, that's in the too difficult or the too risky bucket. And if you're dealing with relatively benign markets, there's not a lot of variation in price, you might say, well, I don't have to look at that. I would argue very strongly that once you have got sort of scenario we've got at the moment, where you're seeing markets moving really quite dramatically, then you need to have every tool you can in your locker to be able to manage that price risk, and therefore understanding where they exist, terminal markets, futures markets, how do you use hedging? I think that's a really important skill to have. But fundamentally, if we're going to get to a stage where there is a shortage of supply over demand, shortage of supply over demand, then you are going to find people looking for new suppliers. You are going to find people looking for alternatives, looking for alternative ways of formulation. You're looking at alternative specification. I mean, if you're in a very short supply market and you're holding out for an absolutely unique specification, I can be pretty sure that you will find it more difficult and more expensive than the company that has the standard specification to be able to get what it is you need. And yeah, the more unique, the more specific you are, the more you're likely to be exposed in a short supply market.
Yeah, that's some great tactical, and strategic kind of advice, or in that domain. So, what I hear is don't spec unobtainium and try to try to get that anytime soon, where the suppliers are.
And also, remember, if you're in a real commodity market, it's very often about taking decisions fast,
Yeah.
not thinking that you can negotiate down the market. If you've got a short supply market, the price is going to go up. And then it's about you making sure that you take those decisions fast and that you're well covered.
You might find this interesting, but the Fed chair of the United States, Powell, basically said it's easier to we just found it's easier to increase demand than it is supply. I just thought that was kind of humorous. It was in the Wall Street Journal.
That's a great quote.
Yeah, I guess the last question is, what's your sense of the biggest challenges for procurement right now, and what do you see on the horizon?
Look, I think there's a very big short-term challenge, which is the one we've just been talking about, which is the fact that there is some inflation around and that's driven by this. Look what's happening in freight. Look what's happening to freight in the US at the moment. Look what's happening to freight globally. And now, is that because the total global economy is bigger than it was? No, that's not it at all. You've got this mismatch of flows at the moment, and you've got containers in the wrong places, and there is supply where there isn't demand, and there's demand where there isn't supply. So some of that is short term, and I think some of it is longer term. And as a procurement supply professional, you've got to work through what it is, because the last thing you want to do, by the way, is go out and get yourself some really good long coverage, and then you think you've got yourself a great price, and then the market falls away, and you're left paying the most expensive prices around. So I think that's some of the short-term issues. But longer term, I come back to what we were talking about before. The sustainability agenda, the ethical sourcing agenda, the importance of integrity, the importance of ensuring your supply chains are free from modern day slavery, the importance of diversity